So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Stacie, and I'm happy to deliver this session today on creating your normal day by day. So, we'll begin with just a grounding practice so that we can arrive in this space together. I'll ask you, no matter where you're sitting, if you're sitting on the floor, just to take a cross-legged position, or if you're on your couch or in a chair, to allow your feet to come into a position where they're grounding into the floor, into the earth. The feet are parallel. The back begins to straighten. Your shoulders roll back and away from your ears. And if you feel comfortable to do so, you can close your eyes or lower your gaze. Tune into your breath without trying to control it. Simply observe the breath and allow yourself to arrive here into the present moment. Let go of what may have come before and what you still have to do after. As thoughts arise, simply bring your attention back to your breath. Take a few breaths, more intentional, deeper breaths. And at your own pace, whenever you're ready, you can raise your gaze or open your eyes. So I'm sure that many of you are experiencing fluctuating uh, emotions during this time of quarantine and lockdown. And so, for that reason, I've prepared something a bit different today. I know that we hear a lot about mindfulness. It's been going mainstream for the last few years, it's been around much longer than that. And there might be some confusion for some of you what mindfulness really is, or it might feel quite intangible. So, I'd like to offer you um, three practices that you can immediately take with you. And there will be time for questions afterwards if anything is unclear. But I'd like to help make the practice itself more tangible. So when I use the word mindfulness, I am referring to the practice of observing without judgment what is from moment to moment. And that sounds perhaps a bit abstract, but I begin with that definition just to remind you that mindfulness isn't limited to something that we do when we sit on a cushion and it's completely still or silent. Mindfulness we can practice every moment of every day. And so, for that reason, I'd like to offer you these three practices. So, the first is more general, and it is basically what we just did, and we'll practice again. It's just a gentle observation of body and breath. And I would encourage you, if you could, to try that when you're waking up in the mornings and before you're going to bed at night. Those are really important times from a neuroscience perspective. Our brains are very sensitive right when we're waking up. And if we give it that shock of, looking at our phone as soon as we wake up, that can set the tone for the rest of the day. So it's important that we're more intentional in how we treat these really sacred times of waking up and allowing the brain to adjust to this new reality. And when we're going to bed, again, allowing the brain to adjust so that our sleep is better. And we can do that um, with just a gentle practice of observing our breath. And if the breath doesn't feel available or accessible to you for any reason, I know hay fever season has started for many of us, but also some of us experience a bit of anxiety when we actually start to pay attention to the breath. Then we start holding the breath, or we feel like we can't breathe like we normally would. So if the breath doesn't feel available to you, you can also simply observe the sensations in your body. And so let's do that together. Let's practice um, what that could be like. Again, it's not about how long you do it, it's about the intention behind it. So it doesn't matter if you do this for 5 minutes or 25 minutes. The intention of taking this time for yourself can really benefit you emotionally, physically, mentally, cognitively. So let's just practice. Let's say, the alarm clock has gone off. You've kind of been jerked out of sleep, so to speak. And, just imagine right now, wherever you are, that you are lying in your bed and you're just trying to wake up. And so that means that, you're lying down, your head is perhaps on a pillow, your eyes are closed, you might be a bit groggy. And in that position, you can just start noticing, again, without judgment, what the body is saying to you. You can start at the toes, at the tips of the toes, at the feet, and just travel upwards, doing a gentle body scan, noticing where there's different sensations: tightness, lightness, heat, cold. You might feel pulsating, or the blood moving. If you've just woken up, you might notice that, there's a stiffness in your neck. And you could do that just for 2 to 5 minutes of following the different sensations throughout the body, not getting stuck on any particular one, not allowing the thoughts to travel further. So if you notice, oh, I'm a bit stiff in my neck, it's not about, oh, what did I do, or did I sleep wrong? Just following those sensations up and then back down, and then up again and back down, and taking those very, very sacred moments for yourself. And similarly, before you go to sleep, you can choose to sit on the floor, you can sit in a chair, you can sit on your sofa, or you can also do it lying down if you prefer. And just again, similarly, closing your eyes. And you might find at first that your thoughts are going, and it feels like this serves no purpose, but that's okay. You recognize the thoughts, and then you bring your awareness back to your body or your breath. And you recognize the thoughts, and you recognize the moment when you're no longer lost in thought. It's not that when we take these moments of silence or stillness that we expect the thoughts to stop. We don't. The mind is doing its job when it's thinking, right? So instead of worrying about thoughts arising, it's about the process of not allowing yourself to get lost in thought. So, you're getting ready to go to bed and you're sitting there and you're just breathing. And maybe at first it feels like you're replaying the day. Oh, I did this and this was good and this was bad. And oh, I'm thinking. Pause. Come back to the body and breath. Oh, I really need to do this thing and that thing tomorrow. Pause and come back to the body and breath. And you just continue that process of recognizing when the thoughts are getting ahead of you, and then coming back to your breath. So that was the first um, point that I want, or uh, practice that I wanted to offer you, that you can implement any time of day. It doesn't have to be right when you're waking up or before you're going to sleep. Those are two times of day where it's especially beneficial to you. But you can do it anytime. If you're working from home and you're finding it challenging to have, meeting after meeting, but, virtual meetings more than you're used to when you're working in the office, or perhaps you are still going to work, and you're finding it um, a stressful journey. You can use those opportunities to just tune in and take a moment to come back to yourself. So, the second point that I wanted to offer, the second practice, is a meditation of trust. Most of us find ourselves in positions where we're not in contact with many people. And if we're in contact, it is not in person. We're not, even when we are taking our exercise one time of day, so much of uh, the government guidance and news, no matter if it's online or on television or in print, has told us, we have to social distance, we shouldn't mix households, we shouldn't be close to one another. And so we're finding that maybe we're getting less input than we're used to. If you worked in an office before and now you're working from home, sure, you're communicating on some platform, but there's a dialogue that's no longer happening that used to happen. And we can use that as an opportunity to get back to ourselves. So often we're looking for external validation, whether it's about the work that we're doing, the clothes that we have on, the hair that we've just had, we've gone to the hairdresser, we have new hair, whatever it is, we're often looking for some form of external validation. And many of us might not recognize that there's that feeling, that bit of unease that we have, like we can't trust certain things. A part of that might be coming from this lack of feedback that we're experiencing in these times. So I'd like to offer you a type of mindfulness of trust practice, that you can get back to trusting yourself and not seeking that external validation. And so what um, it may seem challenging or new to you at first, but it's just about noticing how you're feeling when you're doing particular things. And in order to notice how you're feeling, you might need to do things slightly differently. So, for example, if you are working from home and you're eating at your your desk, or you're not taking real time to eat your lunch or to eat your breakfast because it feels like it's all just kind of merged together. I would encourage you to take the first few bites of your food in silence, not doing anything, not checking emails, not looking at your phone. Can you do that? Can you commit to, even if it's just the first 2 or 3 bites, eating with a bit of silence and noticing in that moment what comes up for you? When you're working on something, when whether it be a presentation or some client work, a logo, a website, whatever, and you feel like there's something missing, can you take a moment and slow down and allow your body to talk to you? Your body is always in conversation with you. Our bodies are always in conversation with us. But a lot of the times we don't understand or recognize that conversation because of all of the input that's happening around us. So again, without this input, there's an opportunity for us to tune into how we feel. The next time you find yourself mindlessly scrolling, I call it, it doesn't mean, and I say that without judgment, it doesn't mean that your mind isn't in it, but it means that you're scrolling, whatever it might be, whatever your favorite platform is, you're scrolling, but you're not really absorbing. Your mind is, there are thoughts about things you should be doing, things you haven't done yet, things you want to do. Then there are the thoughts that are coming from the scrolling. There's a lot happening. So there's an opportunity to, when you find yourself mindlessly scrolling, to pause and tune in. What's happening? What do you feel in your gut? What do you feel in your neck and shoulders? What do you feel in your fingers? What do you feel in your hips? And that's how we recalibrate, regenerate this trust that we innately have. We slow down and we recognize, actually, after I've been scrolling for a certain amount of time, I'm completely distanced, I'm completely tuned out, I feel completely numb. And that's my body saying, actually, this isn't what I need right now. This isn't serving me. And then it's almost easier to shift the behavior if we're doing it based on the needs of our body rather than what we think we should be doing, or judging ourselves to be doing one thing or another. And when I use the word judgment, I just want to mention that when I use the word judgment, I don't use it only for the negative, so to speak. We're constantly judging, both positive and negative. It is a judgment to say something is good, just as it is a judgment to say something is bad. It's a judgment to say, well done, just as it is to say, not so much. And so it's important that we recognize that, because with mindfulness, especially the example I just gave, if you're scrolling whatever platform and you recognize it and you recognize that you've spaced out and it's a bit of a numbing, then it's not helpful to say, oh, I should be doing something else, or this isn't good for me. What's important in that moment is just to be in tune with whatever is happening in the body and to recognize the body is gripping, it's tightening, or maybe it's relaxing, depending on what the activity is, and then connecting those two and to rebuild the trust of your own ability to know what your needs are. So that was practice number 2. Practice number 1 was just your general meditation of body and breath. I suggested that you try it when you're waking up or before going to sleep, both perhaps, as well as in times where you just recognize your energy could use it. For example, when you have these back-to-back meetings, just taking a few breaths before going into the next meeting, or when you feel some type of stress or anxiety because you're having to travel on public transport. And then the second practice was allowing yourself to connect with the feelings in your body, the things that are happening in your body, in order to recalibrate and find and reconnect with yourself while you might be feeling disconnected from your friends, family, and colleagues. And you can do that by just tuning in, and no matter what the activity is, taking a few moments of um, silence when you start your meal, being really intentional about eating rather than doing that as something that you're doing while you're doing something else, um, or even while you're doing an activity, just tuning in and noticing what's happening. And so the third practice that I'd like to offer is what I call mindfulness in action. And I think it's extremely important to be reminded over and over again that mindfulness is not only limited to sitting in silence. Mindfulness is something that we can practice from moment to moment. It is possible for us. It's not necessarily that we are practicing, but it is possible. There's always the opportunity to come right back into the present moment. And so mindfulness in action during these times, especially, I have found to be most useful in setting boundaries and being really intentional around our boundary setting and doing it proactively. A lot of the times we're not setting boundaries, and then we find ourselves exhausted, irritated, overwhelmed, and then we go all the way in the other direction, right? And we project this frustration onto other people when really it was us. It was us who didn't set the boundaries. It was us who didn't communicate the boundaries. It was us who uh, didn't enforce the boundaries. And then we're frustrated with the world because, we wind up overwhelmed. So with the boundaries, I'd encourage you to think about how do you create healthy boundaries? And the first 2 practices can be really important in doing that, because in order to create healthy boundaries, we have to know ourselves and we have to know where our boundaries are. We have to know where our limitations are. So that means, for example, I use the example about myself often. I know that I am at my best when I have my absolute best. I'm at my absolute best when I've had a great night's sleep and when I have, eaten the meals that do really well for me. That's when I know I'm great. When I know I haven't had a great night's sleep, then I know that my patience is shorter, that I'm more irritable, that I'm perhaps short with someone in a way, or I have less patience than I would if I'd had a good night's sleep. So my boundary has to adapt depending on what being at my best looks like on that day. And similarly, our days are varied right now. Some days we're feeling optimistic, the sun is shining, it's warm. And even though we might be indoors, we can appreciate all of those things. And then other days, we're fed up. When is this going to end? We're feeling out, as if we don't have control over anything. And really, there's no difference between the two. But the awareness around understanding where we are is what can help us manage it better. So Give it some thought just for a moment. If you were to ask yourself now, when am I at my absolute best? Can you answer that? What do you need to be at your absolute best, where you're patient, compassionate, open, and in observing that, then I'd like for you to think about what's going on right now, whatever your situation may be. What do you need? What are you missing? What is within your control? Some of you will have learned a great deal about yourselves over these last few weeks. Some things may have surprised you. You may have expected for certain aspects of being in a lockdown situation to be really um, challenging, and they haven't been, while other things that you thought would be easy for you have been extremely challenging. And so, in observing those things, where are your boundaries? Again, I'm happy to give examples from my everyday life. I have left many WhatsApp groups, for example, uh, just because it was too much. There was much more texting than usual, and most of the texting has been around COVID-19, and so I needed to take a step back from that. I'm not on social media nearly as much overall. I'm very choosy about where I read the news, what outlets I choose to read the news, what headlines I read and choose not to read. These are all boundaries. And then there's simple things that can support our um, boundary setting, such as, putting do not disturb on our phones so that it's set for a particular time period. It doesn't mean that we won't look at our phones, but it means that we're more intentional, or we have a choice. We're not being called away from presence because of a notification. We're choosing to look at our phones at a certain time. It means not falling asleep in front of the television. Again, from a neuroscience perspective, it's very hard on the brain. It's not a nice thing for the brain, generally speaking, when we fall asleep in front of the television with the television running. But that's another thing that we can do, that we have boundaries around when we're consuming entertainment, in what settings, for how long. We have boundaries around our time. If you're working from home and this is new to you, you might find it really challenging to separate work time from personal life. And everyone has different things that they do. But again, this is all mindfulness in action, knowing what works for you. So for some people, it might be having a morning routine, waking up as they always did, taking a shower, putting on clothes as if they were going into the office, and then sitting down for a certain amount of time. And then really at whatever time the day is over, whether it's 5 p.m. or 7 p.m., the day is over. There's no more work emails. There's no more just this one last thing that I want to do to get it off my to-do list. And having a container around the workspace specifically, but also work time. And then on top of that, mindfulness is in action also means compassion, because for many people, that's not realistic. If you're a caretaker, that might not be realistic to have a perfect container around the time and place where you're working, because you have kids or parents or whoever you may be taking care of. kind of mixing, right? And so then you have to develop different boundaries that are still clear and um, that give you the room to have self-compassion, because you can't compare yourself to people who aren't in your situation or who have more support or whatever the case may be. So it's really important when we're practicing mindfulness in action, again, that we're not doing it from a judging mind. So it's not that when you look at the phone, even though it's on do not disturb, that you're telling yourself, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. It's just noticing that something is still happening, and then tuning into how you feel when you're on the phone for a certain amount of time. And again, that meditation, that mindfulness of trust helps us to change certain patterns of behavior that may not be serving us. So I'll just recap once again. 3 practices that can support you to create your normal day by day. A more general meditation of body and breath that you can do at any time for however long, that allows you to really intentionally in that moment come back to you. Remind yourself, this is my body and this is my breath, and I'm here. The second practice was a meditation or mindfulness of trust, where you try to connect how you feel in your body to particular actions or patterns of behavior, so that you're able to recalibrate. So you're relying less on external validation, external feedback, and really tuning into what it is that you need. And both of those practices support the third, overall mindfulness in action, where we specifically were looking at creating healthy boundaries that support us so that we don't find ourselves in these extreme positions of impatience and frustration and overwhelm, because every day we're doing a little bit to uphold boundaries. So I've talked now for a half an hour, and I'd love to hear from you with any questions or feedback that you'd like to offer. We can go into more detail if something was unclear. I'm all ears. No worries if you're feeling shy. What we can do, I'll give you just a few more moments. And what we can do in these last few minutes is just another nice practice, a guided practice to gently take you out of the session and back into what awaits you. So if there aren't any questions, we'll close with a guided practice, and I will mute myself on the longer pauses, but don't worry, I am here. And yeah, let's just get started. If you come into a seated position, if you have been sitting on the floor like I have, you might want to change the cross of your legs. That's what I'll do as well. If you're in a chair or on the sofa, bringing the feet in a parallel position, firmly grounded into the floor, allowing your shoulders to roll back and down away from the ears, your spine straightening into its natural curve. And at your own pace, you can close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever feels comfortable to you at this time, and begin to tune into your breath and the many sensations dancing through your body. As thoughts arise, that's absolutely normal. It's absolutely okay. Acknowledge the thoughts. Observe what it feels like to come back from being lost in thought. And then bring your awareness back into your body and breath. Feel into your body. Observe where you're at in this moment without judgment. What is the breath saying to you? The body sensations. Notice where it's easier and where it's more challenging, more difficult to observe the sensations. Allow your breath to deepen, the breath to become more intentional, still with your eyes closed. And at your own pace, you can raise your gaze or open your eyes. It's been a pleasure offering you this session today. I hope that some of it resonates, or that you find that some of it you're able to integrate into your daily life. If you are feeling shy now, but perhaps later you think you might have some questions, uh, I'm always available for questions. You can reach me at contact@oyaretreats.com. That's contact@oyaretreats.com. And you can find me on all of your favorite platforms at OYA Retreats, Oya Retreats. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.